So there's kind of two things here. First, I would say the dark web and the deep web are technically two different things. What a lot of people are talking about when they refer to the dark web is the deep web itself, which is a side of the internet that is unfiltered by your typical search engines and like internet moderators. So the surface web is, if you go onto Google and you search something on Google and you go to a website and you get a result, these are all websites you're seeing that are being monitored by like a dedicated team at Google. And they're very easy to access. Anyone can just open the internet browser, can type for anything, and it will take you to all these places like Facebook or Instagram or whatever, which are all surface web website. There are kind of stages of deepness within the web. There are certain websites on the surface web that once you kind of log into your account or whatnot, they may be sections of them that aren't filtered that wouldn't really be considered the deep web, and they're definitely not considered the dark web. But you're kind of like it's kind of like a pyramid of things getting like deeper into the web and away from the surface web and more towards the deep web. The dark web itself is just a part of the deep web. So the dark web is part of the deep web that is called the dark web because of the things that are hosted on it. So the dark web is within the deep web. The deep web is the unfiltered internet, where anyone can upload anything and it's often not monitored. A lot of the reason because it's difficult to find. So how can someone monitor something that they can't find? And then the dark web are any of these websites on the deep web. So not everything on the deep web is bad. A lot of things on the deep web, a lot of countries use it for like political organization when they are in a dictatorship, when their speech is being monitored. It's used for a lot of reasons. It's used for any reason that someone might want to do something and not be monitored doing it. They'll use the deep web for that. The dark web is only those websites on the deep web that are used for, horrible things like drug dealing, human trafficking, like snuff videos, like dark things. That's why they call it the dark web. So it's not really its own website. It's not its own type of internet on its own. It's just the name that people refer to websites on the deep web that host dark things. What the dark web is it's websites on the deep web that host dark things and are different from the surface web because they are not filtered by your traditional website, internet filtering moderators and things like that. So I would say that before I had ever taken any drugs, I was very well aware of what the drug market online was like, through the deep web and just also through other encrypted messaging services and things like that where people sell drugs. Because I was aware of it because there's a whole section of YouTube and the internet of people that enjoy the morbid, like enjoy true crime documentaries and things like that. And there's a big section of YouTube and internet culture that really loves to talk about the dark web and the deep web. And I was very much intrigued by that as a young teenager. So I kind of became, like, at the age of 14, 15, very well aware of like where drugs could be purchased, I suppose. Not necessarily that I knew exactly how to get them or like that I knew exactly how to get in contact with those people and things like that. But already before I'd ever taken any kinds of drugs, I had a good idea of where I could go if I wanted to buy some online, or how I could begin the process of finding out where I needed to go if I wanted to buy some online, I suppose. When it comes to me buying drugs online for the first time, I suppose I'd already been taking drugs for a while at that point. And I might go into the second question as well here, because was it curiosity, convenience, or something else that led you to try it for the first time? It is definitely convenience. Picking up drugs in the traditional sense can be just inconvenient, really. Not necessarily like frightening or movie-like in the way people expect it to be, but very inconvenient when you have to text someone and they come to you and they're very slow and whatnot. So the idea of buying drugs online was first pitched to me by someone else, not to purchase them through the dark web, but rather to purchase them through Telegram, which is no longer, which was an encrypted messaging service. So your messages are all protected and can't be sold to the police or whatnot, which is why it draws lots of criminal activity. especially drug dealing. So that is how I first came across the idea of buying drugs online. It was out of inconvenience for buying drugs in person, and then also just the awareness of how plentiful and how easy it is to buy drugs online. Um, so the deep web is very easy to access. So when you search something on Google, Google can show you 1 million, 2 million, 3 million websites. These are all websites that have been verified to be okay and to be law abiding. So Google's not actually showing you all the results, it's showing you all of their filtered results that they can confirm are okay for you to see. The difference is to get to the dark web is a very different thing to get to, because to get to the dark web, you would need to know someone that can send you there. Since, I mean, it's not really hard to find depraved people on the internet, which is unfortunate and it's quite frightening. So I suppose in theory, you can get links for these things from crazy people on the internet with relative ease. So I guess it's kind of a mix of easy and difficult to access this. It depends how badly you want to access these websites, and depends the people you know and what potentially horrifying things they get up to. So to start off with a disclaimer, I have never purchased drugs from a dark web website. Because the dark web is not a nice place to, like, you don't know what you're going to click on. Like, you could click on something and it could be like horrible videos of horrible things, and I don't want to spend my time clicking random things, and I don't know where they're going to take me, because you don't know what you're going to see, and I don't want to see any of that. So I've been on the dark web to be edgy and to look around when it was an exciting thing that one could do. But I've never purchased drugs through a dark web website. Other reason to this being is because they often expect you to use cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin or similar, which is a digital currency that is often used over the internet, and is often what people use to buy services on the dark web. I don't know anything about cryptocurrency, quite frankly, so I wasn't prepared to learn about it and to get cryptocurrency and to then learn how to pay with cryptocurrency and all of that. And also, it's more complicated to buy drugs on the dark web than it is to buy them on encrypted messaging services like Telegram. So when it comes to the sorts of drugs that I've purchased online, it has been things that are typically more difficult to get from your local dealers. So things like weed and cocaine and ketamine are all very easy to purchase from, people on the streets. Like, the likelihood is if you walk up to the right person, you could probably buy any of those three substances from them or someone they know within an hour. Sometimes there are drugs like acid or magic mushrooms, or kind of more so like psychedelic drugs often is sometimes more difficult to get from street dealers, and painkillers and things like that are often more difficult to get from street dealers as well. To say you want a Valium or Xanax, or a lot of American drugs, like Adderall, and things like that, people tend to buy those online versus from a street dealer as well. So a lot of the time I think it's about availability. It's about who you think is going to have it in stock. And when you get in contact with one of these online drug dealers that do postal deliveries, they have so much more for sale. Quite literally everything you can imagine they have for sale. Any drug you've heard of will be on there. They'll have things from really hard things from heroin and meth to really light things like hash and weed. Mainly for me, I've used it in the past for psychedelic things like acid and magic mushrooms. And I would also say another thing about the dark web that makes it just not a fun experience is you can see the unethical drug trade in real time. Like, you can see people's prescriptions being sold. Like, they'll still be in their original prescription packages and things like that when you're looking through their menus, as they call them, their pictures of their product and things like that. It really gives you a stark reality check of the griminess of the drug trade. So most commonly sold, yeah, everything. People's prescriptions, like psychedelics, really hard drugs, things like that. And this is not something I've ever seen, but I know you can also, I know there will be places on the dark web that sell like exotic drugs, like really, really rare drugs that are not necessarily really rare, but very not commonly taken by people. Examples like, I believe there's one called like crocodile. There's some strange drugs out there that really aren't taken by people recreationally, but they can also still be purchased on the dark web. It's a big marketplace for hard to find things that people may want to purchase for some reason, whether that's drugs or other things as well. And just to add to that last one with a quick side note, actually, because I think it's a really interesting development I've been seeing recently, is that people use drug dealers for like drugs in the traditional sense. Like ill people use drug dealers to get the drugs they need when they don't otherwise have access to them. I think it's particularly a thing in America, of course, because we have the National Health Service over here. But increasingly, I've been seeing people selling Ozempic and Manjaro, drug dealers selling Ozempic and Manjaro for cheaper than one can get it privately. So, if someone can't get prescribed, if someone really wants Ozempic and they can't get prescribed it for their doctor and they have to go private, and the private practice is charging, I don't know how much it would cost, but £80 a month or whatever. And then you find a drug dealer online that's selling Ozempic for £30 a month. People use drug dealers for that as well. People use drug dealers for medication, not necessarily just recreational drugs. So I think this one definitely depends on the drug itself. I would use drugs and have used drugs both in group recreational settings and also alone. So things like mushrooms and acid I have done alone and have done also in group settings. Weed, another one, alone and in group settings. There are certain other drugs that I wouldn't do alone, like cocaine, for example, because it's just it's too much of a stimulant. You don't want to be alone when you're on cocaine. It kind of defeats the whole object of what the drug is doing for someone. And I also think there is it feels different to do something like to snort a powder by yourself in a dark room. Feels very a lot. Different drugs have different social perspectives. Like people look at different drugs differently, and people look at the users of different drugs differently. And I think that informs for a lot of people what drugs they feel comfortable doing by themselves and what drugs they only feel comfortable doing in a group setting. And then you have all these kinds of drugs as well, like MDMA, that are quite literally designed to be taken at a rave full of people with loud music. So doing MDMA by yourself in a room is not going to give you a high, really. Or it will give you a high, but it won't really feel like a very nice high, I don't think. Because it kind of defeats the purpose of what the drug was invented to do. So I think it depends on the drug itself. But in essence, I have used drugs in both recreational group settings and in a solo setting. I have not used drugs for anything outside of recreational. Like I haven't used drugs, like I haven't taken cocaine to go to work, as I know some people sadly fall into the trap of doing, needing it to be a crutch for them in their everyday life, to support them is not something. I use drugs recreationally. I don't feel a daily need to be supported by them. It's a very interesting question, and one that I have just been thinking about for a minute, because I suppose it's not something I've ever thought about previously. I think anxiety is not something I ever feel when I buy drugs. If anything, I have the anxiety thinking about purchasing the drugs, but once purchased, the anxiety is gone, because the idea of doing drugs does not make me anxious in any way, really. Guilt, sometimes I feel guilt. It can be an unpleasant experience picking up sometimes, especially in person, when you see, if you're picking up from someone who doesn't look like they're doing very well, it gives you a minute to realize the kind of bad industry you are supporting by taking these drugs. So guilt can definitely be one of them. It is always a conscious thought. The unethical drug trade and what your part is in that as a purchaser, because you are playing a part in that. So guilt, yeah, and relief, yeah, definitely. I think relief is something you feel after making a drug purchase simply because you now have the drugs and you don't have to buy them again because you have them, which is a relief because it can be annoying. And also, I would say the fourth thing that I often feel after making a purchase is excited because one is often buying drugs to attend an event, to do them with friends, or to go to a music festival, to go to a rave, to go on a camping trip, So, it's often exciting to picture yourself and your friends and how these drugs will come in handy on whatever journey you're about to go on. So, yeah. So I would say the reason that I started to purchase drugs online more than traditionally on the street is because of the convenience. Um, you often pay by bank transfer. It gets delivered to you via Royal Mail. It's very, very convenient, and often it's cheaper as well. And often you can buy bigger quantities without worrying about being arrested for having so many drugs on your person. And also the drug dealers feel more comfortable because they don't have to worry about you and if you're the police or whatever. So I think that the convenience of it, the choice of drugs there are, and the price, and kind of it is a more optimal way of picking up drugs in every way to purchase them online. So I think that is probably the main reason why I started to purchase drugs more online than on the street once that was something I did for the first time. And I think the major reason, or the major difference, I would say, in people purchasing drugs online and people purchasing drugs on the streets is age. I think you'll find a lot of people who are purchasing drugs online are just older, are just, 40 years old, maybe older in their 30s, they have a career, they have a family. They also, on top of that, smoke weed every day, or they, on top of that, do cocaine at their work parties, or they're a big hippie and they, go camping and like to take psychedelics. I think at the end of the day, they don't want to be buying drugs from teenagers on the street. They have more to lose, I suppose. They have more to lose if they're caught with drugs on their person. They have, it feels strange to one who is a 40-year-old man to buy drugs from someone who's essentially a child, even if they're over 18, who in your eyes is still really, a child. So I would say a lot of the people buying drugs online are actually just older people who don't feel like buying drugs on a street corner anymore at that point in their life. Then on top of that, I mean, obviously the internet is ever increasing at a very rapid speed in its capability. And I think perhaps in generations below me now, they'll just be more used to using the internet than they are to going onto the street and talking to people. So I think maybe as people's internet literacy continues to rise, and as things like drug laws change as well, there are so many external factors that can suggest whether people are going to buy drugs online or on the street. I think, and as cryptocurrencies become more and more popular as well, which they are becoming much more popular very quickly, you can use, I'm pretty sure on things like Monzo and Revolut now, these internet banks that have been popping up everywhere, you can use cryptocurrencies to buy things, or you could also buy disposable cards for one-off purchases, all these kinds of things. It's a lot more accessible for people now. So I think what I would say are probably two of the biggest reasons people turn to buying drugs online instead of traditional sources is the ease of it and the access of it and the fact that you aren't going to be caught by your local community. if you are someone who has like a serious career or something as well. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. So, for some context, I started buying drugs online and then stopped buying drugs online. I think a big part of that is you're right. It becomes easy and you start doing drugs more frequently. And I realized that I was buying larger quantities of drugs and getting through them quicker because it was too convenient. Um, and that, is a problem because I suppose part of if you want to do drugs, but you also like don't have time to pick up or like really don't want to pick up from a traditional street dealer, that could just stop you from doing them completely. If you don't care enough to really source them out. But the ease of access and the way you can bulk buy drugs online means I was doing them more frequently, and that's part of the reason why I have stopped buying drugs online. And also just because there's still a little part of me that's scared about the fact that Royal Mail are delivering drugs to me with my name on them. Is another part of the reason. Um, but also, so when I was buying drugs online, what would you say your drug use has changed since you started buying online? Different substances? Yeah, definitely. I definitely was experimenting with different substances that I hadn't seen being sold by street dealers before. Um, so yeah, I would say it became more frequent. It became different substances. Um, it made it easier to do more and to do a wider variety, which is why I stopped buying drugs online, I suppose. I think that idea is completely inaccurate. I don't think it is a safe place for someone to use or to scroll unless they know what they're doing. And it's certainly not a safe place to purchase things unless you really know exactly what you're doing. You need all these things, like you need a VPN to cover where your internet is displaying. Like I'm not sure how familiar you are with VPNs, but say I'm on the dark web in my house in London and I use a VPN. The VPN can make it look like I'm actually in, Sri Lanka. It can make it look like I'm anywhere. So that's one way of not being traced. And also, I mean, if you're like putting your actual credit card, bank card details into a website on the dark web is so not anonymous and so not safe. And beyond the fact that you don't want to give some of these really sadistic drug lords your personal information. You don't have to tell someone your personal information for them to get it on the dark web. Like everyone on the dark web is a master of this industry and a master of using the internet. They can hack very easily. They can, and unless you also are on the same level as them, it is absolutely not an anonymous or safe place to browse. And not even just from scary people on the dark web that are going to hunt you down and all the fear that I know a lot of people are familiar with is how the dark web operates and the scary shadowy figures that use it. But even just from the police, like you're not safe from the police on the dark web just because you're on the dark web, and it's an unfiltered side of the internet. The government and the police can still very easily track what you're doing on the internet at all times or what you did previously, unless you are very clued up and you know how to avoid doing things like that. And honestly, one would need to be a lot more clued up than I am to stay safe on the dark web, which is another reason why I don't really flock to it very frequently, because I am not smart enough to be safe on the dark web. It needs to be something you're really good at for it to be anonymous and safe. If you're good at it, yeah, it is actually completely anonymous and very safe if you know what you're doing. Because if you know what you're doing, you know how not to be traced back to whatsoever, which is exactly why so many people use it. So if your average user is absolutely not anonymous and is absolutely not safe. So I have always tested drugs that I've purchased from first-time sources. So yes, I was I was worried about what was in them, especially with if you don't know what country you're purchasing from. Fentanyl is really much less of a thing to lace drugs with in the UK than it is in America. But if you're buying drugs online, you really don't know where they're coming from. They could be coming from America. Fentanyl lacing it's a thing that happens a lot of the time. So I've always tested them. I've actually never tested them myself. I've always had someone test them for me. So I can't really explain how that process works. But it's, you put some inks on them or some chemicals on them, and they go a certain color depending on if what's in it is like a methamphetamine or something like that. But yes, I have been worried about what was in the substances I bought, and I think people should always test their substances when they're buying them for the first time, because you never know what's going to be in them. Not online, no. I've never received something from a purchase online that was cut or contaminated or just something completely different. I have, however, experienced that from buying drugs from the street. I think because it's a much more serious operation, what you're getting is usually what you actually are getting. Whereas if you buy drugs from someone on the street, they can give you anything, and realistically, you're not going to find them again. But you know, if you're on someone's website and they sell you something and it's not what it is, and you're a crazy person, you can go back to their website and be like, hey. Whereas, you know, someone can sell you something at a festival that's got contaminated, and realistically, you're never going to find them again. Yeah, I suppose another one of the reasons that I retired from purchasing drugs online is that I was probably the anxiety that it was giving me waiting for a package of a lot of drugs, because if you're buying them online as well, you're paying for postage and you're paying for you know, they do the whole like, oh, buy like a whole ounce of weed and get like free postage and shit like that. Like it operates like your normal online marketplace for normal things. So because a lot of the time you end up getting, you know, like a lot of drugs, like this is an intent to deal amount of drugs if someone finds this being delivered to you by Royal Mail. It was always delivered by Royal Mail, which felt a little bit too real. I was getting anxious at the prospect of being caught or tracked. Even though it never happened, and I think it's actually something that doesn't happen very often. And it didn't happen to me. So were there any moments you realised you weren't as anonymous as you thought? No, actually. I never had any real reason to be anxious or skeptical that I had been found out, but the idea that I could be found out was enough to kind of just put me off it after a while. I didn't expect it to be so easy. I didn't expect it to come via Royal Mail, and I didn't expect it to be done through bank transfer. You know, all things that all of us are very familiar with and can do very easily, I suppose. I found that shocking. I also found it shocking the way the drugs that are sold, and because so this person that I was buying drugs from had a group chat of people that would buy drugs from him. A group chat that I never sent any message in because I didn't want anything to do with that. But one thing I did find surprising is a lot of people in that group chat were very active. You know, they had a community around this online drug marketplace. They seem to be friends. They seem to give each other tips on how to get the best highs and things like that, which was shocking to me. And yeah, another one of those things that makes you think kind of like, oh, this is actually quite real. This is a bit too real for comfort right now. It didn't feel any more private to me, honestly. No, if anything, it felt like it had the potential to become more public than it did buying it on the street. Um, to make it more addictive, I don't know if I think it made it more addictive. I think it made it, you know, it made it easier, which made it. What once before was like, oh, shall we get drugs? Oh, we have to go to the cash point. Oh, we have to call someone. Oh, we have to wait an hour for them to get there. And now it's true about drugs. Yeah, okay, I booked them. They're coming on Monday. Sign for delivery. Is like, in some ways, I suppose, makes it more addictive. But I didn't feel like the drugs themselves were more addictive. I didn't feel like I needed to do. I didn't suddenly feel more addicted to them or feel like I needed to do them more frequently. And I don't think it really felt more consuming. But it did make it. It was really all about ease and convenience, I think. Um, I'm not sure. I haven't experienced any difficulty in hiding drug use from friends or family, buying online or buying in person. I suppose in some ways, actually, it makes it easier to hide. from family if you're living in the same house. You have to like pop out the house and pop back in a minute in a very suspicious way after you've just got in some random person's car and then come back in. So I suppose in some ways it makes it easier to hide from friends or family if you're buying them online and they're getting delivered. But then you still have, family loves to ask what's in your package. So I wouldn't say it really makes a difference in terms of hiding it from friends or family. I don't find either of them particularly bad experiences for me personally. I don't fear my drug use being exposed to an extent. Like if I turn on the news and the news was like, here's this man that does drugs all the time, look at all the drugs he's doing. I suppose that would be nice. But in general, I don't have a view of drugs that make me fear people exposing me using them. And I also don't have much anxiety in keeping it a secret because, to be honest with you, the only reason I feel the need to keep it a secret or I would not like it to be exposed is because I know how a lot of people feel about drugs. And I know a lot of people feel very negatively about them. And I know that that can translate to them feeling negatively about me. Or also just, I know a lot of people have difficult or harrowing experiences with drug use and therefore they don't feel comfortable to be around someone they know is doing drugs or has done drugs or does do drugs because drugs make people feel uncomfortable. So outside of I don't like to make people feel uncomfortable and I don't like to put people in situations around substances that they don't like being around and not to. I suppose the anxiety of secrecy, I don't feel that way. I'm not really massively trying to keep it a secret, apart from with my parents because they'd be annoyed at me. I'm not like concerned that the whole world is going to find out I'm a drug addict. Although I suppose I am because I'm doing this anonymously, but I don't feel anxiety over either of those things. If anything, it's the only anxiety I feel is that people will think less of me for doing drugs, which I don't think is fair. I personally think perhaps their idea of what drugs are and why people would take them and the kinds of people that take them are actually incorrect, potentially. Yeah, I definitely think a lot of drug users think they're more in control than they are, for sure. And I think more so than the anonymity, I think the ease of online transactions probably ramps up a lot of people's drug usage in a way that they don't um, initially realize, and that can cause them to struggle with addiction. I also think that um, I don't know if I think it's specifically online transactions that can contribute to a false sense of control for users struggling with addiction. I think the false sense of control that a lot of drug addicted people think they have is actually just a universal feeling that people have when struggling with any type of addiction. That they think they're in control until they realize, well, until something happens and they realize they're not, I suppose. But I'm not sure I feel the anonymity contributes to a false sense of control because I don't think anyone's purchasing habits are altered because they didn't want to buy certain things from a street dealer in person. If you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I would say that the most dangerous thing about buying drugs on the dark web is just being on the dark web, using the dark web. You know, a lot of people are accessing it for the first time absolutely have no business being anywhere on the dark web, and if they have accidentally like fumbled their way into it somehow, um, they are not protected enough. Myself included, like I definitely had no business and have no business being on the dark web. I'm not intelligent enough in that kind of respect to keep myself safe from there. And also, I think you just realize very quickly that buying drugs is the most normal thing people go to the dark web for. Like buying drugs is minor. It almost feels legal compared to a lot of the other reasons people use the dark web. And you don't want to be involved in any of that, quite frankly. You don't want to see it. You don't want any part of it. It's not a nice place. Not nice things happen there. They happen amongst not nice people. There's no reason, apart from morbid curiosity, that your average person would go to the dark web, especially your average person in the United Kingdom. And I think the most dangerous thing is thinking you know what you're doing, because you don't know what you're doing. 100% you don't know what you're doing. So I think the idea that people know how to keep themselves safe online, even on just on the surface web, is people don't know how to keep themselves safe on their social media profiles, let alone on the dark web. And I think nobody talks about it because nobody really sees the dark web as much more than like a scary story. But, you know, it is a real thing. And people always hear like fictional horror stories about the dark web that actually are fictional. And I think all of the like disturbing stories around it as a thing dilute what it actually is to people that may want to go on and use it. I just don't think it's worth it. It's really not worth it. It's not in your control. And you can think it's in your control, and you can think you've made all the necessary precautions to keep yourself safe and to not leak any of your details. But at the end of the day, it's just not in your control. It's in the control of the Royal Mail. It's in the control of the person that's sending this to you. It's in the control of the people hosting the website. It's in the control of your bank that you're paying with, or your cryptocurrency that you're paying with. You know, your internet provider. There's so many people. It is not a one-on-one transaction. It is a global transaction that you are completing right now, and you absolutely are putting yourself out there in many ways that you don't even understand, that you probably don't want to put yourself out there in. That's what I would say.